one question I wanted to ask you was the first day of Live Aid. You were there with 70,000 people. When you went to bed at night, did you sort of what was going through your brain at that moment in time?
Well, I think you've got to remember that Live Aid, the concept happened maybe 2-3 months prior. The first thing that happened, the first thing we did after making the record, was to put together a body of people who actually knew what they were doing. A couple of wayward musicians I wouldn't trust at all. We have a bad reputation for very good reasons. And the first piece of advice we were ever given was by George Harrison, who had tried to do something similar with a concert for Bangladesh a few years before. And of course, he said, look, the infrastructure was just all over the place and the money just kind of disappeared. He said, but you get good people around you. So we put together the Band Aid Trust. So this board of people, this body of people from the music industry would meet every single day to discuss how, where, and the logistics of what we were buying and what we were sending out to sub-Saharan Africa. So when Bob walked in one day with a notepad with a drawing of a planet on it, drawing of the Earth, with a knife and fork either side of the globe, saying, "I've got this idea," and proceeded to go on about Live Aid and 2 concerts happening on the same day, but on opposite sides of the Atlantic. Originally it was going to be New York, but we couldn't get the stadium and stuff. But from that moment on, we started working on this fantasy, because at that time it was a fantasy. At that time, you still had to book a telephone call to America. You couldn't just pick up your mobile and do it like you can now. There was no internet. There was no infrastructure there to do it. None of the technology that we take for granted today didn't exist. It really was telexes and things back then. So for us, it had been kind of formulating in our minds. But on the day of Live Aid, and bearing in mind that, I'd been privy to all of this, I was part of all of this big build-up, I still, weirdly, inside didn't believe it was going to happen. It was too big. It was just too big. And it wasn't until the only way you could get the artists into Wembley Stadium that day was by helicopter from Battersea Heliport. And even sitting on the helicopter, flying in on the day, there was still an element of doubt that this was really going to happen until we flew over what was an empty Wembley Stadium to see it surrounded by people. And at that point, you think, okay, okay, it's not a dream. But yes, a lot of panic going on. But fortunately, there were enough people who knew what they were doing to pull it together. It's very handy having Michael Grade on the board of trustees, who was the head of the BBC at the time, to give us 5 hours of prime time national television. It was great having Harvey Goldsmith, who was used to putting on these mega concerts. So we had the right team, which is of utmost importance.